So this is the Museum of Cairo, obviously in Cairo, Egypt, and this is a pictorial of all the different things I've seen in there. And there's no soundtrack, so I'm just going to read you a little bit of history on Egypt, so you might enjoy a little bit of knowledge on Egypt and look at the beautiful artifacts from yesteryear. So the history of ancient Egypt spans the period from the early prehistoric settlements of the northern Nile Valley to the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BC. The Pharaonic period, the period in which Egypt was ruled by a pharaoh, is dated from the 32nd century BC, when Upper and Lower Egypt were unified, until the country fell under Macedonian rule in 332 BC. Egypt's history is split into several different periods according to the ruling dynasty of each pharaoh. The dating of events is still a subject of research. The conservative dates are not supported by any reliable absolute date for a span of about 3 millennia. That's pretty close. The following is a list of according to conventional Egyptian chronology. Prehistoric Egypt is prior to 3100 BC. The Naqada III, the Proto-Dynastic period, approximately 3100 to 3000 BC, sometimes referred to as dynasty. A lot of these pieces obviously fall in those years. The early dynastic period is the first and second dynasties. The Old Kingdom goes from the third to the sixth dynasties. The first intermediate period, or the seventh or eighth to the 11th dynasties. Then there's the Middle Kingdom, which is the 12th to the 13th dynasties. A lot of history here in Egypt. The second intermediate period is the 14th to the 17th dynasties. And then the New Kingdom is the 18th to the 20th dynasties. A lot of dynasties. The third intermediate period, also known as the Libyan period, is the 21st to the 25th dynasties. The late period is the 26th to the 31st dynasties. So it looks like there's been 31 dynasties. And the Ptolemaic Egypt is from 305 to 30 BC. I always wondered, in the year 30 BC, when they asked what year it was, what did they say? Because that's 30 years before Christ, and you can't tell the future. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. The Neolithic period. Nile has been the lifeline for Egyptian culture since nomadic hunter-gatherers began living along it during the Pleistocene era. Traces of these early people appear in the form of artifacts and rock carvings along the terraces of the Nile and in the oasis. Along the Nile, in the 12th millennium, an upper Paleolithic grain-grinding culture using the earliest types of sickle blades had replaced the culture of hunting, fishing, and hunter-gatherers using stone tools. Evidence also indicates human habitation and cattle herding in the southwestern corner of Egypt near the Sudan border before the 8th millennium BC. Are you paying attention to all these millenniums? Despite this, the idea of an independent bovine domestication event in Africa must be abandoned because subsequent evidence gathered over a period of 30 years has failed to corroborate this. There's some amazing pieces here. I was really astounded by taking the pictures. The oldest known domesticated cattle remains in Africa are from the Fayum c. 4400 BC. Geologic evidence and computer climate modeling studies suggest that the natural climate changes around the 8th millennium BC began to desiccate the extensive pastoral lands of northern Africa, eventually forming the Sahara by the 25th century BC. I was in the Sahara today. It was quite exciting. Continued desiccation forced the early ancestors of the Egyptians to settle around the Nile more permanently and focus them to adopt a more sedentary lifestyle. However, the period from 9th to 6th millennium BC has left very little in the way of archaeological evidence. Prehistoric Egypt. The Nile Valley of Egypt was basically uninhabitable until the work of clearing and irrigating the land along the banks was started. However, it appears that this clearance and irrigation was largely underway by the 6th millennium. By that time, Nile society was already engaged in organized agriculture and the construction of large buildings. One of those consists of the pyramids. At this time, Egyptians in the southwestern corner of Egypt were herding cattle and also constructing large buildings. Mortar was in use by the 4th millennium. The people of the Valley of the Nile Delta were self-sufficient and were raising barley and emmer, an early variety of wheat, and stored it in pits lined with reed mats. They raised cattle, goats, and pigs, and wore linen and baskets. They wove linen. They didn't wear linen and baskets. They wove linen and baskets. Prehistory continues through this time, variously held to begin with the Amratian culture. Between 5500 BC and the 31st century BC, small settlements flourished along the Nile, along whose delta empties into the Mediterranean Sea. The Teslan culture was the next to appear. It existed in Upper Egypt starting about 4500 BC. This group is named for the burials found at the Deir Talsa, a site on the east bank of the Nile between Asyut and Akhmin. The Tassian culture is notable for producing the earliest blacktop ware, a type of red and brown pottery painted black on its top and interior. The Badari culture, named for the Badari site near Deir Tassa, followed the Tassian. However, similarities caused many to avoid differentiating between them at all. The Badan culture continued to produce the kind of pottery called blacktop, although the quality was much improved over previous specimens, and was assigned the sequence dating numbers between 21 and 29. The significant difference, however, between the Tassian and the Badari, which prevents scholars from completely merging the two, is that Badari sites are Chalcolithic, while the Tassian remained Neolithic, and thus considered technically part of the Stone Age. That was a long time ago, the Stone Age. The Mauritian culture is named after the site of El Amra, about 120 kilometers, about 75 miles south of Badari. El Amer was the first site where this culture was found unmingled with the later Gurzu culture. However, this period is better attested at Nagada, and so is also referred to as the Nagada culture, or Nagada I culture. Blacktop were continued to be produced, but white cross-line ware, a type of pottery decorated with close parallel white lines crossed by another set of close parallel white lines, began to be produced along that time. The Mauritian period falls between SD 30 and 39. Newly excavated objects indicate that trade between Upper and Lower Egypt existed at this time. A stone vase from the north was found at El Amara, and copper, which is not present in Egypt, was apparently imported from the Sinai Peninsula to perhaps Nubia. Obsidian. An extremely small amount of gold were both definitely imported from Nubia during this time. Trade with the oases was also likely. Hope this is making all sense to you, and hope you're enjoying the pictures. Nagada II. The Gurza culture, Nagada II, named after the site of El Gurza, was the next stage in cultural development, and it was during this time that the foundation for ancient Egypt was laid. The Gurza culture was largely an unbroken development out of the Mauritian, starting in this Nile Delta and moving south through the Upper Egypt. However, it failed to dislodge the Mauritian in Nubia. The Gurza culture coincided with a significant drop in rainfall, and farming produced vast majority of food. With increased food supplies, the populace adopted a much more sedentary lifestyle, and the larger settlements grew to cities about 5,000 residents. That's huge. It was in this time that the city dwellers started using adobe to build their cities. Copper instead of stone was increasingly used to make tools, and weaponry, silver, gold, lapis lazuli, imported from Pakistan in what is now Afghanistan, and Egyptian phalans were used ornamentally. And the cosmic, I wonder how much of this stuff is coordinating with what the pictures are. And the cosmetic palettes used for eye paint, since the Badari culture began to be adorned with reliefs. By the 33rd century BC, just before the first dynasty of Egypt, Egypt was divided into two kingdoms, known from latter times as Upper Egypt to the south and Lower Egypt to the north. The dividing line was drawn roughly in the area of modern Cairo. Well, there you have a little bit of history. I'll keep reading as we have a few more pictures to go. The historical records of ancient Egypt begin with Egypt as a unified state, which occupied sometime around 3150 BC. According to Egyptian tradition, Menes, thought to have unified Upper and Lower Egypt, was the first king. Menes, I'm not sure how you say it. This Egyptian culture, customs, art expression, architecture, and social structure were closely tied to religion, were remarkably stable, and changed little over a period of nearly 3,000 years. Damn, that's a long time to keep something going. Egyptian chronology, which involves regnal years, began around this time. The conventional chronology was accepted during the 20th century, but it does not include any of the major revision proposals that also have been made in that time. Even within a single work, archaeologists often offer several possible dates, or even several whole chronologies or possibilities. Consequently, there may be discrepancies between dates shown here and in articles on particular rulers or topics related to ancient Egypt. There also are several possible spellings of the names. Typically, Egyptologists divide the history of pharaonic civilization using a schedule laid out first by Manetho's Aegyptica, which was written during the Ptolemaic Kingdom in the 3rd century BC. I have no idea how bad I'm blowing these words, but I think I'm pretty close. Prior to the unification of Egypt, the land was settled with autonomous villages with the early dynasties. And for much of Egypt's historic thereafter, the country came to be known as the Two Lands. The pharaohs established a national administration and appointed royal governors. That's a lousy shot there. According to Manetho, the first pharaoh was Menes, M-E-N-E-S. But archaeological findings support the view that the first ruler to claim to have united the two lands was Narmer, a final king of Naqata III period. His name is known primarily from the famous Narmer palette, whose scenes have been interpreted as the act of uniting Upper and Lower Egypt. Menes is now thought to be one of the titles of Horahaha, a second pharaoh of the first dynasty. Funeral practices for the elite resulted in construction of mastabas, which later became models for subsequent Old Kingdom constructions, such as the Step Pyramid, thought to have originated during the 3rd dynasty of Egypt. The Old Kingdom is most commonly regarded as spanning the period of time when Egypt was ruled by the 3rd dynasty through the 6th dynasty. That's 2686 to 2181 BCE. The royal capital of Egypt during this period was located at Memphis, where Djoser, 2630 to 2611 BCE, established his court. The Old Kingdom is perhaps best known, however, for the large number of pyramids, which were constructed at this time as pharaonic burial places. For this reason, this epoch is frequently referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. The first noble pharaohs of the Old Kingdom was Dosher of the Third Dynasty, who ordered the construction of the first pyramid, the Pyramid of Dosher, in Memphis, Necropolis of Saqqara. That's who I visited today, and you'll see the video on its own tomorrow. Saqqara. Fantastic. It was fantastic. It was in this era that formerly independent states became nomes, districts, ruled notably by Pharaoh. Former local rulers were forced to assume the role of nomarch, governor, nomarch, which is a governor, or work as tax collectors. Egyptians in this era worshipped the pharaoh as a god, believing that he ensured the annual flooding of the Nile that was necessary for their crops. I love this picture right here of the gold inlaid coffin there. The Old Kingdom and its royal power reached their zenith under the Fourth Dynasty. Snufuhu, the dynasty's founder, is believed to have commissioned at least 3 pyramids, while his son and successor, Khufu, Greek Cheops, erected the Great Pyramid of Giza. Snufu had more stone and brick moved than any other pharaoh. Khufu, his son Khafra, and his grandson Menkaure all achieved lasting fame in the construction of the Giza Pyramid Complex, which I filmed the other day, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. To organize and feed the manpower needed to create these pyramids required a centralized government with extensive powers. The Egyptologists believe the Old Kingdom at this time demonstrated this level of sophistication. Recent excavations near the pyramids, led by Mark Lerner, have uncovered a large city that seems to have been housed, fed, and supplied the pharaoh workers. Although it was once believed that slaves built these monuments, a theory based on the Exodus narrative of the Hebrew Bible, study of the tombs of the workmen who oversaw construction of the pyramids, has shown they were built by a corvée of peasants drawn from across Egypt. They apparently worked while the annual flood covered their fields, as well as a very large crew of specialists, including stonecutters, painters, mathematicians, and priests. I was told 100,000 worked to build it for 30 years. The Fifth Dynasty began with Usurek, circa 2495 BC, and was marked by the growing importance of the cult of the sun god, Ra. Consequently, less effort was devoted to the construction of pyramid complexes than during the Fourth Dynasty, and more to the construction of sun temples in Abusir. The decoration of pyramid complexes grew more elaborate during the dynasty and its last king, Yunus. He was the first to have the pyramid text inscribed in his pyramid, which I saw today. Egypt's expanding interests, that thing you're seeing right there, that is freaking amazing. And they have one that's built out of granite and carved intricately. You can't explain how something like that was made. That out of metal is one thing, but out of granite, I can't tell you. It's the most amazing artifact I saw in the museum, by the way. Egypt's expanding interests in trade goods such as ebony, incense such as myrrh, and frankincense, gold, copper, and other useful metals